Chapter 4. In which a goat is succored. "Why is a funeral necessary?" asked Christie. "It is customary," said the undertaker. "I know it is customary," said Christie, "but why is it necessary?" "It has always gone on," replied the undertaker, "and it always will go on." "I wish I were capable of such faith," thought Christie, "and he will have to sue me for his account. What can he do if I refuse to pay? Were my mother not being cremated, he could threaten to dig her up again. As it is, he is perhaps limited to doing something unpleasant with her ashes." Christie was the only mourner, economy as to relatives, as to so many other things, being one of the virtues of this novel. The Reverend, paid to perform the ceremony, sang lustily and unembarrassed by himself. He had done it before, to Christie's uncomfortable stare. The coffin slid jerkily away through the low oak doors, bound for the NTGB Holocaust. As Christie turned into the aisle and went towards the door, it was to find that the Reverend had doubled round through some back passage, quickly enough to be able to offer his condolences to the departing bereaved. Christie remembered his fee at this point. That is, he remembered that the undertaker's estimate had included a fee for the Reverend. Christie smiled at the thought that the Reverend mistakenly thought he was going to be paid. The Reverend, encouraged of course, smiled back and pressed into Christie's hand, by way of a valediction, a leaflet. "When my time comes," thought Christie, "if it ever does." Christie gave directions to his undertaker that the single wreath was to be disposed of by being offered not to a hospital, but to the nearest branch of the People's Dispensary for Sick Animals, if it was still called that, there to be fed, if possible, to a sfacilated goat. The undertaker solemnly undertook responsibility for the execution of this last request of Christie's mother, who had been unreasonably fond of goats. The Reverend's leaflet was a newsletter to all those, both of them, thought Christie, who worshipped regularly at the Anglican Church of St. Jude, Hammersmith. Christie read it on the sofa that was now his when he reached home, noting how heedless was the Reverend in his too frequent use of the typewriter exclamation mark, formed unsatisfactorily by an apostrophe over a full stop. There was also a number of spelling and grammatical errors for which Christie forgave the Reverend. Then he went over to the bureau that was also now his, took out some lilac notepaper, and wrote the following letter to the Borough of Hammersmith Weights and Measures Department. 28 Mall Road, London W6. Dear Sirs, Re St. Jude's Church. You will note that the organization publishing the enclosed leaflet claims to have the answer to all problems, personal, political, and international. I would be grateful if you would check upon the factual accuracy of this claim, and, if you find it to be in any way false or exaggerated, I trust you will institute proceedings under the relevant section of the Trade Descriptions Act. Yours sincerely, Christie Malry. Chapter 5. The duel of dictionary words between Skater and Wagner, and the revelation of the latter's nickname. I shall now attempt a little dialogue between Christie and the office supervisor, as if it had happened. Supervisor: Malry, I've asked you... Christie: Mr. Malry, please. Or Christie, if you like. It's up to you. Supervisor: Who is interviewing you? Christie: Friendly chat was your very expression. Supervisor: A form of words. Malry, I cannot say that... Christie: Mr. Malry, I must insist, or Christie. People from the earliest times have been strict about forms of address. You are attacking me by calling me names. I refer you to other wars. Call me by my proper name. There was silence. On either side, in balance, were the power to sack and the power to resign. It was not a time for the former, the supervisor decided. He would not call him anything. Supervisor: Where were you yesterday afternoon? Christie: At my mother's funeral. Supervisor: Why didn't you ask permission? Christie. She died at very short notice. In fact, with no notice at all, on the evening before last. Supervisor. Long enough for you to arrange the funeral for the next day? Christie. There wasn't any more time. It's a short novel. And Christie shrugged his way out, knowing there was no answer to that. Yet, as he made his way back to his section, Christie was annoyed that his supervisor had been so unfeeling and unsympathetic about his mother's death. The supervisor had no doubt seen himself as being professional, businesslike, standing no nonsense from death and such like. I have been debited, thought Christie. Double entry must apply. It was not until well on into the morning that this particular debit could be balanced. One of Christie's more menial tasks was to open his section's post in the mornings, and this he had done as usual, sorting it into orders, invoices, and inquiries, complaints. The complaints were what gave him most pleasure to read. On this particular day, there was the latest in a festering series of letters from a restaurateur who had been unlucky in the roulette of Tappa's stock rotation policy. Cakes he had been sent were not only stale, but vermiferous as well. The reputation of Skater's restaurant had suffered as a result, Mr. Skater maintained, and he was demanding vengeance. The first of his letters had indeed gone so far as to make the hackneyed request for the managing director's head under separate cover from an abject apology and an immediate settlement of untold damages. Today's letter, Christie had noted with some disappointment, evinced a certain falling off in the quality of the Skater invective. It gave details of that small proportion of the offending goods as had escaped consumption, and the control numbers of all the batches from the trays. Then it resorted anticlimactically to obfuscation as to the exact nature of what would happen if Tappa's highest authority was not on the phone, apologizing that very morning. Christie removed the letter. Christie searched his waste paper basket, found the Skater's restaurant envelope, and removed that too. No one was watching. Carefully casual, Christie Malry replaced the letter in the envelope, left it for a minute, slipped it onto his lap, left it a minute, took out his handkerchief, covered the letter, slid them both into his left-hand trouser pocket. The letter burned there in the well-known fashion all the rest of the morning. He will not ring this morning, Skater, thought Christie. Down by the river at Hammersmith Bridge, legally in his lunch hour, Christie fed the birds with ham fat torn from the quarter he bought at the narrow shop next to the cinema in the Broadway. The lean he ate. Sparrows there were on the roof of a houseboat moored by the wall, pigeons on the paving, and gulls in the air, wheeling and screaming. Gwylan to wail, as is their way. I repeat myself. Greasily his fingers also tore the Skater letter into many pieces, and over half an hour he released them on the ebb tide to float down past Harrod's Depository, Grosvenor Bridge, Bugsby's Reach, Frog Island, and all those other evocative points. It was a real end for them, the pieces. Skater has left it until his lunchtime trade has exhausted itself, thought Christie, just as I thought. Every time the phone rang, Christie expected it to be Mr. Skater. At 3:10 it was, and he did not want to bother with such as Christie. He wanted the managing director. Christie gave him his section head, Mr. Wagner. Already Christie knew Wagner's familiar name, Wanker. So great was Mr. Skater's anger that his words could be distinctly heard by Christie, and without effort. He began by asking why no action had been taken on his letter. Wagner told him no letter had been received. To make sure of this, the section head came over to Christie's desk and searched it thoroughly. Then he pursued the search on the desks of two other clerks, his secretary, his assistant, and his deputy. Try down at Cold Harbour Point, thought Christie, with some pleasure, or even foulness. Skater's assertive roar, when he was told that no letter had arrived, could be heard several more desks away. His proposal was that, if he were there, he would defenestrate Wagner. Christie's section head was riled at this, and, forgetting he was putting the company's reputation in jeopardy, he suggested that were Skater to come within 100 yards of him, he would, before he could carry out his threat, be subjected to a rapid process of trituration. Skater responded with a distinctly unfair, for it was accurate divination, from Wagner's telephone manner, of the section head's helminthoid resemblances. Wagner snapped back with the only word he could think of at the time, cryptorchid, though, as he had never had the necessary opportunity of observing, let alone carrying out a count, Christie felt that his superior had compromised his integrity at this point. And, with sounds of gulping incapacitation at both ends of the line, the conversation lapsed without any sign of an erenicon. Christie did enjoy it all. When Christie arrived back in Mall Road, he was pleased to see he could think of it as finally his home, for there was one letter on the mat, and it was addressed to him. An organization was hoping to sell him some bulbs, flower bulbs, begged him for his attention, enclosed a reply-paid envelope. Christie felt slightly debited at the waste of his time, and promptly credited himself by sealing the envelope without putting anything in it, and going out at once to post it. When he came back, he cooked for himself a full frying pan of onions and sausages. Then Christie began to draw up his accounts. The first reckoning. Note that the nearer you can place the creditor to the debtor, the nicer it will look, though it does not really matter. Yet, because of an entry of a different date, which is sometimes placed between the first and the second entries where it does not look well, no little trouble is caused in searching for them, as he who has tried knows. You but one cannot speak fully of this here, and must help yourself by making use of your own natural ingenuity. Pacioli. Christie Malry in account with them. First. Debit. Aggravation. October 1st. Unpleasantness of bank general manager, £1. October to April. Branch atmosphere as described, £4.50. October to April. Specific lambastings from chief and assistant accountants, £2.30. November 24th. Virtually forced to join staff association, 60p. October to April. Chagrin at learning no secrets, 55p. May 1st. Restriction of movement due to Edwardian office block, 5p. May 2nd. Suffering and loss due to undertaker, £1.71. May 2nd. Unpleasantness felt by presence of Reverend, 4p. May 3rd. Office supervisor's lack of sympathy, £6. May 3rd. Bulb importuning, 3p. Total, £16.78. Credit. Recompense. October to April. Small kindnesses from Joan, 28p. May 1st. Scratch on facade of Edwardian office block, 5p. May 2nd. Undertaker's bill unpaid, £1.71. May 2nd. Letter to Weights and Measures re St. Jude's, 4p. May 3rd. Destruction of skater's letter, £6. May 3rd. Bulb firm's reply paid envelope returned empty, 3p. May 3rd. Balance owing to Christie carried forward to next reckoning, £8.67. Total, £16.78. Chapter 6. Christie described, and the Shrike created. An attempt should be made to characterize Christie's appearance. I do so with diffidence, in the knowledge that such physical descriptions are rarely of value in a novel. It is one of the limitations, and there are so many others. Many readers, I should not be surprised to learn, if appropriate evidence were capable of being researched, do not read such descriptions at all, but skip to the next dialogue, or more readily assimilable section. Again, I have often read and heard said, many readers apparently prefer to imagine the characters for themselves. That is what draws them to the novel, that it stimulates their imagination. Imagining my characters, indeed. Investing them with characteristics quite unknown to me, or even at variance with such description as I have given. Making Christie fair when I might have him dark, for instance. A girl when I have shown he is a man. What writer can compete with the reader's imagination? Christie is therefore an average shape, height, weight, build, and colour. Make him what you will, probably in the image of yourself. You are allowed complete freedom in the matter of warts and moles, particularly, as long as he has at least one of either. Nor are his motives important, especially are his motives of no importance to us, though the usual clues will certainly be given. We are concerned with his actions. A man may be defined through his actions, you will remember. We may guess at his motives, of course. He may do so as well. We may also guess at the winner of the 3:15 at the next meeting at Market Rasson. But Christie's girlfriend, I shall enjoy describing her. Come along, what's your name? Let's have your name. It'll come, like everything else. Try. Where does she work? In a butcher's, say. She could be called the Shrike, then, which will be too obvious to some, too obscure to others. Chapter 7. The Shrike's Two Rules, and Other Observables. Every debt must have its corresponding credit, explained Christie. Perhaps every bad must have its corresponding good. An extension might be called moral double-entry. In eating these beef olives, which is very good for us, we are at the same time preventing someone else from eating them, which is undoubtedly bad for them. We had beef olives over today, said the Shrike. That's why we're eating them. Not in Cawnpore, said Christie. Eh? Said the Shrike. Mr. Cameron took some home, too. We had so many over. Did he pay for them? Asked Christie. No, of course not. It's his business, said the Shrike, without offence. That's an added complication, said Christie. Who do we debit, and who credit? Christ knows, said the Shrike. I'm uncertain too, said Christie. Here is Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty. Accurate measurement of an observable quantity necessarily produces uncertainties in one's knowledge of the values of other observables. I think you'll give up the beef olives soon, said the Shrike. No one seems to want them very much any more. Only the old people buy them now. The housewives don't know what they are. Why should they? Said Christie. Debit beef olives, credit housewives. Can't you leave your work at work? Said the Shrike gently. Christie nearly asked her what his work was, but he realized he might go too far. No one must know of his great idea, not even the Shrike. The Shrike was a kindly, warm girl of about 29 whom Christie had met at the Hammersmith Palais, venerated for the visit of the original Dixieland jazz band, the night after doing his accounts. The Shrike had picked on Christie for a lady's invitation, and that was that. Christie was not unwilling, for the Shrike was nice. Nice was the word that applied nicely to the Shrike. Soon Christie knew that the Shrike had an old mum up in Islington, that she was not trying to find a husband like all the other girls were, that she had a modest flat of her own in Brook Green, near Splendid Lions, Tapper's opposition, and that she would quite like to see Christie again, if it suited him. She would not want to impose, but she did like his average, kind face, and the way he dressed, and the way he held her properly. And this was a lady's invitation, after all, wasn't it? Yes, Christie had said, generally to everything, and thought to himself that if he could satisfactorily stabilize his sexual arrangements, then he could the more efficiently concentrate on his great idea. And so it was to be. Nothing happens by accident in this novel, or almost nothing. The occasion of the beef olives above was the second visit that Christie had made to the Shrike's flat. The first had been after the encounter at the Palais, when the Shrike had made it clear, in the same breath as she had suggested a second, that she never let anyone on the first occasion. It was one of her little rules. After dinner on this second occasion, then, Christie, having expressed proper gratitude for the provender provided, the Shrike asked him if he would care to recline on the moderately elegant sofa which helped to fill her living room. Christie did so care, and the Shrike accordingly went to fetch her goblin cylinder vacuum cleaner, which was an old model, but recently serviced and creating an excellent suction at its nozzle. The Shrike removed Christie's clothing, article by article, whilst at the same time giving him a good going-over with the goblin, using the full range of accessories as well as simply the end of the tube or pipe. Christie was enchanted. He quickly had one ejaculation, and another came after about 20 minutes. He was only 18. Then the Shrike took her own clothes off, very unashamedly and naturally, of course, and performed an unsophisticated but infinitely alluring dance for Christie. Especially for him. Solely for him. This spontaneous dance brought her closer and closer to Christie over a period of about 15 minutes, until it was being performed on top of him with extremely pleasurable results for both of them. And in the pleasantest course of time, Christie and the Shrike were able to enjoy almost simultaneous orgasms of unforgettable proportions and intensities. Now there is something on which the reader may exercise his imagination. Afterwards, they both lay for a long time on the sofa, together in body only, their minds away in different directions. The Shrike was rehearsing in her mind how to rid herself of all other romantic and sexual encumbrances in order that she might be able to devote her full attentions to Christie. She was a good manageress, the Shrike, despite being paid only as an assistant. Christie was considering the application of double entry to sexual pleasure. He soon realized, only one instrument with which to make entries. Conversely, the Shrike had, in common with most women, at least 3 points at which entry was possible. Christie permutated the possibilities in his mind, and then mentioned them to the Shrike. To her credit, she did not then treat him as someone in whom the beast had gained the upper hand. 2 she would have, but the third was her own, she maintained stoutly. Inviolate. It was the second of her little rules. The last is yet to come. Christie had discovered early on an area in which the writ of double entry did not run. She was a real girl, the Shrike. She had hair in her armpits.